These are the notes for Algebra 1A, Section 04, talking about adding and subtracting rational numbers. Rational numbers just means we're adding and subtracting fractions. So for a few things we want to talk about first is comparing numbers and ordering numbers from least to greatest or vice versa. Anytime you're comparing numbers, you want to make sure that you have your numbers in the same format. So putting them all into decimals is always very helpful. So if we look at this first one here, we have 4 2/3 and need to compare that to 4.667. Well, 4 2/3, if you evaluate that in your calculator, that's just 4.6 repeating. So 4.6 repeating is just a tad bit smaller than 4.667. So we're going to put a less than symbol there. With the second one here, we have the 12.2 is already in a decimal. 147 over 12 is going to equal 12.25 if you evaluate that in your calculator. So 12.25 is a little bit bigger. So 12.2 is less than 147 over 12. Okay, in order to order these numbers from least to greatest, again, we need to get them all into the same format. 3.65 is in a decimal, so we're going to go ahead and put the 3 1/4 into a decimal, and that's going to be 3.25. 19 over 3 as a decimal is 6.3 repeating, and then 3.78 is already a decimal. When you put these in order, although we examine the decimal version of it in order to compare them, you always want to make sure you put them in the form that they were originally presented to you. So the smallest number here is 3.25. So it was given to us as 3 1/4, so you want to use that form of the number. So that takes this off. 3.65 is going to be our next biggest number. And then that takes this off. Our 3.78 is next. And then 6.3 repeating was our biggest decimal, so we want to use the 19/3 last. Okay, so we need to talk about how to convert so that we can actually work with our fractions. So anytime you're taking a mixed number and you want to switch it into an improper fraction, so we can use what we call the check mark method. So all you have to do is follow the check mark. So if I have 2 1/2, I need to change this mixed number into an improper fraction so I can use the check mark method. I'm going to start with my whole number and make a little check mark like that. So what that does is it tells you what order to do things in. You're going to multiply and add. So you take the 2 from the whole part times the 2 that was in the denominator plus 1. So 2 times 2 plus 1 equals 5. So when I change this to an improper fraction, this is going to turn into 5 halves. Your numerator is going to change. Your denominator is always going to stay the same. I apologize for that. Okay, and then anytime we're changing a decimal to a fraction, this part right here, this is if you're using your TI-84 calculator, you can just put the number in, change it to a fraction by using these buttons, math, fraction, enter. If you want to do that by hand, we can take our decimal, for example, 0.75, changing that to a fraction. Since there are 2 decimal places here, we want to put the 75 over 100. If it was just 7, we would put it over 10. If it was 752, we would put it over 1,000. So you want to have the same number of zeros in your denominator as you do decimal places. And then, of course, reduce as much as you can. 75 over 100 is just 3/4. Now, when we're talking about repeating decimals and taking those to fractions, we're going to put it over nines. So you put it over the number 9 if it's 1 decimal place, you put it over 9 if it's 2 decimal places, so on and so forth. So, for example, if I have 0.5 repeating, since that's only 1 decimal place, I'm going to go ahead and put my 5 over 9. So it just turns into 5/9. And then going from a mixed number into a decimal. So there's 2 different ways you can do this. It's really the same thing, but just 2 different ways to think about it. You can take your improper fraction. I apologize. Take your mixed number, change it to an improper fraction, and then change that to a decimal. So I have a mixed number, 6 2/3. I can change that into an improper fraction. So I'm going to use my check mark method here. It's 6 times 3 plus 2. So 6 times 3 is 18, plus 2 is 20. So this is actually 20 over 3. And then I can just divide 20 divided by 3 is 6.6 repeating. The second way I can think about it, if I have 6 2/3, well, I know since I have the 6 out front as the whole part, it's going to be 6 point something. And in order to find out what it is, all you do is you take your fraction part of it, your 2/3, figure out what decimal value this is. It happens to be 0.6 repeating. And then that's what the decimal version of it is, or sorry, what the decimal portion of it is. So it's 6.6 repeating. So you can kind of bypass switching it into an improper fraction if you want, just knowing that the whole part out front is going to remain the whole part out in front of the decimal when you're in a decimal form. Okay, so adding and subtracting rational numbers. So rational numbers, that just means fractions. So you're first going to change any mixed number to improper fractions, determine what your common denominator is, and then from there, you're going to multiply the fractions by something that's equivalent to 1 in order to change the denominator. So when I say equivalent to 1, that means you have to use the same number over itself, because anything over itself just equals 1. This will help us change the form without changing the value of any of the numbers, because it just equals 1. You multiply by 1, it doesn't really affect anything. And then finally, you're just going to add or subtract your numerators. So remember, your denominators are going to stay the same. The numerators are what changes. Here are a couple examples. So first, I'm going to take my 4 2/3, and I'm going to change that into an improper fraction. So I'm going to do 4 times 3, which is 12, plus 2 is 14. So this is actually 14 over 3 plus 1 over 5. And then you figure out what your least common denominator is. Well, the least common denominator between 3 and 5 is 15. So I need to change the denominator over here from a 3 to a 15. So I'm going to multiply by 5 over 5. And I need to change the second denominator to a 15. So I'm going to use 3 over 3. Go ahead and multiply your fractions. 5 times 14 will give me 70 over 15 plus 3 over 15. And then finally, 73 over 15. My second example, I don't have any mixed numbers, so I'm ready to just go ahead and identify my least common denominator. In this case, it's going to be 6. So I'm not going to have to change that second fraction at all. I am, however, going to multiply this first fraction by 2 over 2. Because I need to change this 3 to a 6. So 2 times -4 will give me -8. And 2 times 3 will give me 6. plus my 1/6. So now I have a -8 plus 1, which is -7. And then you keep your denominator. Then our last example, I have two mixed numbers. I need to change both of these to improper fractions. So 2 times 7 is 14, plus 1 is 15. So this is -15 over 7 minus 5 times 3, which is 15, plus 2 is 17. So 17 over 3. And then identify my least common denominator. So between a 7 and a 3, we're going to have to use a 21. I have to multiply this fraction by 3 over 3 because my 3 times my 7 will give me my 21. And this fraction I have to multiply by 7 over 7. Go ahead and do the multiplication. 3 times -15 is -45 over the 21. 17 times 7 is 119 over 21. And now we are ready to add or subtract. So it's -45 minus 119 is -164 over my common denominator of 21.